Yes, we are live. Gary, hi, how are you doing?
Hello, I'm doing well. How are you, Ida?
I'm fine, thank you very much. So, I think we should wait couple minutes just our viewers can join us.
Sure.
So, let's wait. Yes, it takes some time. So, yes, already our friends join us. So, good evening, dear friends. Bishkek American Center is welcoming you in our session Americans Interactive Talk, and I'm very excited to introduce our guest speaker today, Gary Shu from USAID Kyrgyz Republic. So Gary Shu works at USAID and he has the Economic Development Office, which focuses on provide jobs and supporting the Kyrgyz private sector. And USAID works in development countries throughout the world and supports health, education, and civil society. Through USAID, the US government is currently aiding Kyrgyzstan in responding to COVID-19 pandemic and providing equipment for testing, treatment, and prevention, and increasing risk communication. So before moving to Kyrgyzstan, Gerisho lived and worked in the country Georgia, where he met his wife Mariam Yubilava. So they love hiking and skiing in the mountains. So today, Gary will talk about his background as Asian American for Asian American Heritage Month. So, dear friends, I want to kindly remind you, please leave your questions, any comments under this video, and after the presentation, Gary will answer them. So, first of all, thank you very much, Gary, for accepting our invitation and joining us today and for your time. I think we can start. The floor is yours.
Sure. Thank you very much. I have a short intro in Russian that I'll say in, but most of this will be in English. So, добрый вечер. Меня зовут Гарри Шу. Я работаю в USAID в Киргизстане. Моя жена Мариам и две наши собаки очень рады быть в Киргизстане, но, к сожалению, мы скоро уезжаем. Сегодня для меня большая честь говорить о месяце азиатско-американского наследия. So good evening, everyone. I'll be happy to talk a little bit about myself and my Asian American heritage. So I have a very short presentation. It's just a few pictures, nothing too drastic, but I just wanted to show sort of where I'm from and a little bit of my family in the U.S. Just 5 slides. So here are my parents. My father, Kwang Shi, and my mother, Li Fen. They're from the country of Taiwan. Uh, the country of Taiwan. They moved to the United States to study graduate school. And during that time, they were together. They actually knew each other in Taiwan, but they didn't get married until and meet until they were together in Philadelphia. And that's where I was born. That's where this picture was taken. Next slide, please. This is me, the little me right there in the middle. That's the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia. The Liberty Bell is one of the symbols of the United States and during revolutionary times. Next slide, please. That's me on the left. I look very different now. But with my little brother and my grandparents in front of the house that I grew up in New Jersey, on the East Coast, next to Philadelphia and also near New York City. That's one thing I should mention is like a lot of Chinese and Taiwanese families, my grandparents actually raised me. It's a little bit like perhaps what you see in Kyrgyz culture, where the grandparents also raise the children and the parents are working very hard, either far away. And so I actually was very close to my grandparents when I grew up. Next slide, please. Next slide, please.
Oh, I moved.
Oh, you did.
Yes, I did.
I don't see it.
Oh,
How do?
really?
There we go. Oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
Uh, Maybe the slide before that.
Uh-huh. Yes, here. Yes.
So this is my family. I'm on the left there with the partially dyed hair. We're in Tiananmen Square in China. My parents grew up in Taiwan, but they weren't able to visit China until we were older. So this is about a little over 20 years ago, during high school times. So it was actually very exciting to go to China for the first time for all of us.
Mm-hmm.
Next slide, please. And this is just me in college. I went to undergraduate school in New York City, and so this is my dorm room where I put a lot of different posters.
Mm-hmm.
So that's pretty much it in terms of the presentation. If I could say a few more words, I studied electrical engineering in college. Um, I've worked for USAID, the U.S. Agency for International Development, now for over 10 years. And I served in Georgia, the Republic of Georgia, where I met my wife, but also Pakistan, Afghanistan, South Africa, Kyrgyz Republic now for almost 2 years, and soon later this year, I'm expecting to move to Uganda. So we do move around quite a bit, but I would not have it any other way. I find it very exciting to meet other people and to see much of the world.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd be very happy to take some questions.
Mm-hmm.
I have some other broader thoughts about Asian American heritage too, but I would love to hear what people are interested in.
Yes. Thank you very much, Gary. So when you made introduction, it was, I mean, your Russian is very perfect. So thank you very much that you did it. So yes, dear friends, I also want to remind you that any questions, any comments are welcome. So please cast them in the comment section. So the first question, uh, Gary, what does Asian American Heritage Month mean to you?
So I mentioned, I showed a few pictures about my parents in Taiwan, going to China. Um, Asian American heritage in the U.S. is very interesting, because Asian American heritage is not just about being Chinese or being Korean or even being Kyrgyz. I feel that in the U.S., Asians as a whole have a shared history, and so therefore we even though we might be from different countries or different heritages, in the U.S. we have something that kind of unites us together, and so
Mhm.
to me it's reflecting back on the fact that in high school or middle school, I had many friends that were Korean or Indian, Vietnamese. That if I grew up in Taiwan or in any of these other countries or in Kyrgyzstan, it might be very difficult to actually meet somebody of that heritage. But I was very lucky to be able to have those kinds of friends.
Mhm. Thank you very much for sharing this, Gary. So let's move to the next question. So, greeting from Germany. Do you speak Taiwanese?
So I grew up speaking Mandarin Chinese, and one of the interesting things about Taiwanese is that it is a different language from Mandarin. But my parents don't actually speak Taiwanese either, even though they grew up in Taiwan. They grew up speaking Mandarin. They can understand some Taiwanese, but Mandarin was the language of my household. When I was growing up, I often had to go to what we would just call Chinese school, and I would go to learn Chinese. And unfortunately, it would always be on a Saturday, and I would have to take one of my weekends to wake up early to go learn Chinese, and I really didn't like it. I was always told that when I grew up, I would regret it, that I wish I would be able to speak Chinese. And the truth is, yes, I do wish I could speak Chinese better than I can.
Mhm.
I can actually probably speak Russian better than Chinese now, to the horror of my parents. But I do think I meet many of my friends and other Chinese Americans that don't aren't able to speak any Chinese, and I think that is a bit of a loss. I think it would, you know, it's understandable if your family's been in the U.S. for generations and generations, and none of your family speaks Chinese. But my parents did, and I'm happy to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Gary. So the next question: do you think it is important to teach kids the language of ancestor? Did you feel you belong to other culture?
When I was younger, probably a little bit more, that I felt
Mm-hmm.
that I was a different culture. And again, that's part of the fact that in our household, and especially my grandparents, who, like I said, raised me, they only spoke Chinese, and so that's how I grew up. But when I go to Taiwan to
Mm-hmm.
see, I still have some relatives there, and especially one of the first times when I went to Taiwan, they would say, "Oh, you're the American," right? And even though my parents are from Taiwan, I'm going back to where my parents grew up. Uh, they could tell. I don't know what it was. It was something about, maybe it was my hair or my clothing, the way I was standing. They could just
Mm-hmm.
tell that I was not from Taiwan, and it's the same right now, even in Kyrgyzstan. I try not to say anything. Maybe I'll say some words in Russian, but they can tell right away that I'm not. I'm a foreigner. I'm not from
Mm-hmm.
Kyrgyzstan. Maybe every now and then somebody might say something to me in Kyrgyz, but you know, I, there's something about being from another culture that you can tell right away,
Mm-hmm.
apparently. So yes, I do feel like I'm part from another culture.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Gary. So we started to receive questions in WhatsApp. So, do you know any Asian Americans who contributed to the history, science, and other fields of the United States?
Hmm. Do I know any? I don't know if I could say that I'm personal friends with any very important Asian Americans. Let me think. I I did have um, when I was in graduate school. I did have one teacher who was a Nobel Prize winning physicist.
Mm-hmm.
And when I studied electrical engineering, it was in more the, how do you say, optics and more the physical science. And so he was obviously a great contributor um, to the history of physics. And I'm trying to remember exactly what his theory was. I think it was about the something to do with semiconductors and solid state physics.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I I I I do find that the even though Asian Americans are about 5% or 6% of the United States, Asian Americans have been very successful in the United States, and I think they're part of that is culture, of course, but um, there's the opportunity that America provides for people who want to work hard too. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Gary, for your answers. So we can move to the next question. Is it easier for you to be placed in Kyrgyzstan? Were you ever confused with local?
Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned, every now and then I do get questions in Kyrgyz, certainly in Russian. And if it's Russian, I can't quite tell if it's because they think I'm
Mm-hmm.
Kyrgyz or not, or if it's because maybe like most people don't speak English necessarily. But one of um, one of my personal goals is to be confused for every kind of Asian at some point,
Mm-hmm.
because I get questions. Oh, are you Thai or Filipino or Bhutanese? I've gotten.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Kazakh and Kyrgyz I can check off that I've been confused for. But when they ask me, Akudavi, where are you from? I say I'm from the U.S. because that's where I was born and raised.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Gary. You have very interesting stories. So the next question: you have mentioned that you are leaving soon, Kyrgyzstan. What will you miss the most about Kyrgyzstan?
Oh, I'll miss the mountains for sure. I live on the upper side of Bishkek, closer to the mountains and the
Mm-hmm.
hills, and just being able to go up to the flagpole and see the mountains, and on a hot day like today and this week, to be able to see the snow on the mountains is just amazing. Um,
Mm-hmm.
the mountains right here, even in Chewy, they're taller than anything that's in the main part of the United States. And so it's just really incredible to be so close to some world class
Mm-hmm.
geography.
Mm-hmm.
I
Right.
I like I would like to think that Kyrgyz feel for the mountains too. I think it's a part of the Kyrgyz culture that people go up to the Jailo, and the nomads travel
Yes.
back and forth from the mountains.
Yes, it's more about like nomadic culture that we have in our blood. So thank you very much, Gary. So the next question, we know that you said help people during quarantine. Does it continue now or not?
Our assistance definitely does continue. We will continue with or without quarantine, of course. We have some funding and assistance that are specific to the quarantine and to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we're looking for other ways, and we're talking with the international community here in Kyrgyzstan, coordinating with them. We're in constant communication with the government of the Kyrgyz Republic. Obviously, we can't help everything, and we don't have the resources to
Mm-hmm.
respond to every single request. But
Yes.
I especially, have been very busy in the last 3 months, making sure that we're doing the best that we can and finding the funding and the resources to respond where we can.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Thank you very much for doing this, Gary. So, what inspires you to work in your field?
That's a very good question. So I get that quite a bit. Why would why would you go overseas? It's obviously not something that I think most people consider. Um, when I grew up, I always wanted to see where I could really make the most impact, and I actually would take these philosophy courses. I studied.
Mm-hmm.
I took some courses at in graduate school with a very famous philosopher, at least famous for me, and he made a very big impact to me, Peter Singer. And for him, it was about how to do the greatest amount of good. Um, I could have worked in the United States, and as I mentioned, my background was in electrical engineering, but I felt like I would not really make that much of an impact in the U.S. I really thought that going overseas, working in other countries, especially in poorer countries, the work that I would do would be that much more important. And I really wanted to find those opportunities. I was very lucky to be able to find a job at
Mm-hmm.
USAID, which is the biggest donor organization in the world, and to have the resources that we have, and to be able to have the freedom to design and see how we can respond to the needs of Kyrgyzstan or other countries. And so
Mm-hmm.
I feel very grateful. That's not to say that the job can can't be difficult. Of course, I like to say I still go to the office. It's an office somewhere else in another country. Um, but I think in the grand scheme of things, in the larger goals, I couldn't find a better
Mm-hmm.
job in the world to do what I want to do.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Thank you very much, Gary. So, how is it to be Asian American in the United States?
So I grew up in New Jersey, and I grew up right in the middle of New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
It's halfway between Philadelphia and New York City, and now actually the township that I was in, it's about 20,000 people, so not a tiny place, not a huge place either, but it's about 40% Asian, four
Mm-hmm.
zero, which is a lot, and
Mm-hmm.
that's unusual. And to me, I thought it's it's kind of interesting, contrast because you look around and it is America, but you would not have expected it, especially from someone overseas who sees what the U.S. looks like. It's a very Asian place. I'll just put it that way. The schools are good. It's nearby, as I said, the major cities. Your parents are able to go back and forth and commute to work. And I felt that there was quite a strong community there for Chinese Americans or Korean Americans, Indian Americans, a lot of different kinds of Asian Americans. And that I thought was very supportive. That's not necessarily the case if you're an Asian American and you're the only Asian American in a very long way. So that I it's not something that you see in culture very often or movies or books, but that was my experience of being Asian American.
Mhm. Thank you very much, Gary, for your answer. So the next question, there are a lot of Asian minorities in the United States. Do you know where is the biggest Taiwanese minority in USA?
Biggest Taiwanese minority. I'm not 100% sure where the absolute number would be. I mean, I certainly know there are communities in, say, Queens in New York City. Central New Jersey certainly has quite a bit. Northern New Jersey as well. My grandparents, for a while, they lived in Arcadia, California, in Southern California, near Pasadena. So there was quite a community there too. Generally, I get the feeling maybe California might be one of the bigger places for Taiwanese and Asian Americans. But I would say, and I don't know if people generally know this, but Hawaii is obviously very Asian. It's the closest state to Asia, and if I'm not mistaken, it's the only state that's how do you say it, majority minority. So it's not the majority of people are not white. Actually, they're minorities.
Great. Thank you very much, Gary. So the next question, what new things have you learned in Kyrgyzstan? By the way, ideas of Peter Singer really inspired to do good things.
So I mentioned this in my article, but I felt like I got much better at skiing in Kyrgyzstan. I think it's partly because it's actually pretty difficult to ski in Kyrgyzstan. There's not too many resorts that groom or prepare the ground, so it's not as easy. So you have to be much more skilled in being able to go over the ground. And I actually worked very hard at learning. I watched a lot of YouTube videos. I would go ski pretty often. I would talk to better skiers than I would and try to learn more about it. I still have some ways to go, but I feel much more confident than when I first got here. And I felt like that was something that Kyrgyzstan really taught me. I one other thing I'm not as good at is mountain biking. I'm started mountain biking a little bit more, especially during at the end of quarantine when we're able to go up into the hills here, and it's a great way to socially distance, but also get some exercise and see the hills. So I'm learning a little bit of that too.
Great. Thank you very much, Gary. So the next question, does your family have any traditions that are especially important to you?
Hmm. Um. That's a interesting question. Um it's hard for me to say. Like my parents were not very they were traditional in some senses, but not traditional, I think, uh culturally in the practice of culture. They certainly brought with them the Taiwanese culture and mindset or mentality. But we did not regularly practice I don't know, say holidays or other aspects. Um, they, my mother was Catholic and Christian. My grandparents were very Christian, but I never really took to church, I would say. And a lot of the traditional Chinese practices they would I think do out of habit more than necessity or feeling. So I can't say that they've passed on anything specific in that way, but I do when I see my relatives, I do try to practice them too. So I don't know if that really helps answer the question, but uh, it's an interesting one. Thank you for asking.
Great. Thank you very much, Gary. So the next question, what do you think of Kyrgyzstan? How's your cultural shock? Did you experience cultural shock?
Uh, hmm. I'm, uh, I'll have to think a little bit about a couple years ago now. I mean, I guess Kyrgyzstan. Um, to me, it's a very interesting place. It's very mountainous. It's a lot. There's lots of villages. Um, Obviously, the infrastructure is not the best, but I think one of the things I like the most is that people are very friendly when you're in the mountains, especially when you're isolated. uh if something goes wrong, you ask help from a neighbor or somebody who's walking by, and people will help you because there's nobody else around, right? So and that's one of the things I love about traveling within the country. um I mean, culture shock, no, I don't think so. I think I might have had a little bit more culture shock if um, I hadn't had the experience of working in Georgia for a few years. It there is the kind of the Soviet legacy with buildings and some monuments, but it, at this point it doesn't really surprise me, and is actually, if anything, a little bit comforting to me even.
Great. Thank you very much, Gary.
Hmm.
So the next question, do you feel yourself like a stranger or uncomfortable in Taiwanese or Chinese community? Or in these countries because you raised Americanized?
Um, I mean, I think yes. Basically, I'm definitely not Chinese, and not quite Taiwanese as well. I have some cousins. I didn't show the picture, but I have some cousins who grew up in America, but when they were young, maybe about 9 or 10, they moved back to Taiwan with my uncle. And so they really straddle both the American and the Taiwanese cultures. But I don't. I unfortunately don't get enough. I guess Chinese connection because my language skills are not good enough. Uh, but even then, like I said, like there's something, I don't know what it is. Some people can just look at me, they can tell, "Oh, you're not from around here." It's the way I stand or I'm looking or something. So I've learned to try to be a little bit less readable, but I guess I'm not 100% successful at that.
Thank you very much, Gary. So, what recommendations would you give to people who plan to travel to Kyrgyzstan?
I mean, for me, I don't know if anybody else, if this is the way other people would want to be in Kyrgyzstan, but I love driving. I love being able to go up myself into places, and so I would say, get a car, go travel, go see the really remote places. One of my favorite places that I've been to was Kilsu in Narin. And that's fairly remote. And we also went in March, so it was still winter when we went, and we were told we're the first tourists in maybe about 4 months. So that was a amazing experience to be able to do that. You wouldn't be able to do that if you're on a tour by yourself and someone was leading you around. That I can see that some people would like to do that, but I think, especially in a place that's really as accessible as Kyrgyzstan, where the people are friendly and able to help you out and very hospitable, and friendly to visitors. That it makes a lot of sense to be able to go and travel yourself.
Mhm. Thank you very much, Gary, for your recommendations. So the next question for you: what's the most exciting part of your job?
I, unfortunately, it's a part of my job that I don't get to do quite as much, but I love to be able to go see our projects. Um, I had not even been in Kyrgyzstan for a week, and immediately I flew down to Batken.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we didn't get quite to Lilac District, but we went pretty far, and then we traveled along the border. Went to go see a reservoir outside of Batken city that was bordering Tajikistan and Uzbekistan, and um, I we're in Bishkek, so we don't get to go see Osh and Jalalabad very often. But it's a part of the country that I try to go down as much as I can. I love to I I love to go see our projects because that's where our work is actually happening. But it's
Mm-hmm.
also this opportunity to see parts of the world that you normally wouldn't. And I know Bakken is not necessarily international destination, but I still am very happy and very glad that I was able to go see what it's like down there because it is different from Bishkek, and
Yes.
it means a lot to me, and it helps me understand what I need to do for my work.
Great. Thank you very much for sharing this, Gary. So we can move to the next question for you. You have mentioned that there are some similarities between Kyrgyz and Taiwanese cultures. Can you talk me about that?
Um, so I mean, I think I mentioned my grandparents raised raised me quite intensively. Right now, my sister-in-law, who's a nurse in Jersey City, she just had a young my nephew. He's only about a year old, but because she's a nurse right now and during the pandemic, she also sent her child, so my nephew, to my parents or the grandparents, and she hasn't seen her son for quite a few months. And I think that's something that Kyrgyzstan shares with Taiwanese culture. I I I'm not sure that there's. I mean, I guess I would say how much of Kyrgyzstan's culture is shared with Chinese culture? Would you say a lot or a little? I don't know if that's the case. Obviously, it's
Mm-hmm.
closer to each other than say an African culture or a Latin American culture. Um, but there is a shared history, of course. Maybe a little bit contentious historically, but I think mostly people, just like in a lot of places, really care about their family and they work very hard to give a better life for their family. Um,
Mm-hmm.
uh, in Taiwanese culture, well, I mean, one thing about Taiwan that's different from Chinese culture, which you may or may not know, um, you know, China and the Soviet Union have this shared socialist history,
Mm-hmm.
but Taiwan doesn't. Taiwan is the democracy. It does have an authoritarian history as well, but it was it is it likes to stand apart from what China is. Um, so it's it's a shared but I guess diverting path
Mm-hmm.
from what the rest of Asia is doing.
Mm. I understand. Thank you very much, Gary. So the next question for you: who's your favorite philosopher?
Um, hmm. Well, I mean, I did mention Peter Singer. It sounds like maybe some folks are familiar with him. He's a Australian philosopher. He teaches. I would say he's a utilitarian, which is very practical. How to achieve the greatest good for the most number of people. His views can be, to be honest, a little extreme in some cases, but those are very specific cases. But I think he's very intentional and very deliberate about how he explains his thinking and logic for his conclusions. So uh, as a someone who studied engineering and enjoys science and physics, it really appealed to me that that was laid out in that way. Whether it can be practiced all the time, that's certainly difficult, and I think a lot of people would have trouble with that. But it kind of gives you at least a way of thinking and a way of understanding ethical issues.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Gary, for sharing this. So, the next question, are there any stereotypes about Asian Americans in the United States?
Certainly, certainly. What they say about Asian Americans are the model minority, model being the sort of the ideal, and the sense is that the stereotype is, and these are good stereotypes, is that Asians are intelligent, they work hard, they care about their family, you know, that's obviously not the case for everyone because you can't just stereotype an entire group of people. There are certainly Asians who are not those things. But I think those are the good, the very good stereotypes that we have. And I don't know if I fulfill all of those. I think I'd like to think I fulfill some of those. I like to think I'm intelligent enough, and studied relatively hard. I was actually not the hardest worker in school. I think I guess rested on my natural talents. Um, there are negative stereotypes too. I think many of those stereotypes are quite old, maybe 50, 100 years ago, and there is a long history of Asians being in America, but maybe not getting certain rights or having certain thoughts. I don't think that's the case anymore. Um, Certainly, right now there is the issue that I think maybe even Kyrgyz might have issues in other countries where during the pandemic, anyone who's Asian looking is being blamed for bringing COVID-19, and obviously that doesn't make sense. COVID-19 did originate in China, as we think it did, but it's has no sort of ethnic component to it, and so that anybody can be a carrier, and you see that across the world right now.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Yes, thank you very much, Gary. So, we know that you and your wife love hiking. What other hobbies you have?
Uh, Other hobbies? Um, I mean, I mentioned skiing, I mentioned biking. Hiking is certainly one of them. We like to go camping when we
Mm-hmm.
can. Um, I just last weekend we went camping up in Kyrgyzstan Valley, and that was very beautiful. It was nice and refreshing. The weather was great. I I I would like to say I read. I like to read, although I haven't. I feel like I'm very busy at work. And I'll be honest that I think I've been playing video games a little bit more often now, be just like everyone else who's stuck during quarantine. I feel like it's given me a chance to catch up on some of the video games that I have not had a chance to play.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I have lots of things I love to do. Scuba diving. I love to scuba dive. I'm not the very best at it, but I try to do it as often as I can. And I actually have gone scuba diving in Lake Issyk-Kul. There's a place in Chulpanata where you can
Mm-hmm.
try out scuba diving, and there's not as much to see. Obviously, it's not coral reefs and bright colored fish in Issyk-Kul, but it was
Mm-hmm.
still to me a very worthwhile experience.
Mm-hmm. Scuba diving, what does it mean? I didn't get it. Sorry.
So diving where
Yes, I know
breathe
the diving.
and you go
Mm-hmm.
into the water and
Ah.
you stay under the water,
Mm-hmm.
and you swim around.
Ah.
So scuba is the equipment.
Ah, okay. Now I got it. Thank you very much, Gary. So we don't have any questions for now, and this was our last question for you. Thank you very much, Gary. It was really interesting and amazing conversation with you. We were happy to have you in our session. Thank you very much for being with us. And also, I want to say thank you to our viewers and friends who commented and sent us their questions. Thank you very much, everyone. So it's time to say goodbye, dear friends, and Gary. Good luck with everything. Thank you very much that you, I mean, for your, I can't explain now what I mean. So I have a lot of feelings to say thank you. So goodbye, everyone. Have a great weekend. So we will miss you, Gary and Marie.
Thank you very
Bye.
much. It was a great time. Great having you. Really grateful for your attendance and your questions. So please be safe and be well during this difficult time.
Mhm. Stay healthy.